On the 16th of October 2003, I travelled from Nottingham to London and saved the invoice, obviously, for that journey for this very purpose. And to a meeting with Peter Hill, the editor of the Daily Express, formerly editor of the Daily Star, and also his colleague John Chapman and another scribbler. That had originally been arranged by John Lockett at the Daily Star. And the reason why I'm publishing these two documents in this video is because Nick Griffin loves to claim that all of these things are fiction and that none of these things ever happened. And his cronies also claim the same thing. And so that's the reason why I'm publishing these two documents.
Welcome to the Daily Agenda. As you saw there in the previous clip, it proves conclusively that the meeting did happen, and so did the journey there and back to that meeting. A very interesting point, because a number of people have asked me recently if it's still possible to pursue police complaints against Nick Griffin for fraud, and quite frankly I have no idea. Although what I do know is that there is no period of limitation on the investigation and prosecution of criminal offences in English law. So maybe that's an obvious clue. But that said, I do know a number of people did report Nick Griffin to the police for false accounting and fraud and got nowhere with it. My understanding is that the police actually refused to investigate any of it. So the likelihood of someone being able to do it again now is highly unlikely, I would say. In fact, in discussions I've had with Kev Bryan recently, who was the former organiser of Rochdale and Rossendale branch, one of the biggest branches in the country, most successful, and which brought in a great deal of money for the BNP. He was absolutely convinced that Nick Griffin cut a deal with the establishment, and that his father was a high-ranking Freemason. And I've heard all of these allegations before. And I've never doubted, quite frankly, since 2014, when Griffin posted that message on the Daily Agenda website, that in actual fact he did cut a deal with the state. I knew prior to that he totally wrecked and destroyed the British National Party, and I believe he did it deliberately. He flat-packed it. But it was 2014 that was the real turning point in whether I actually believed he was an agent of the secret state or not. That comment sealed it for me. But there was another incident, and lots of people have actually shared with me their experiences of Nick Griffin, and particularly with financial malpractice, which is quite widespread. In fact, thousands of people have alleged it. So you might think that thousands of people have actually got something quite credible to say, wouldn't you? Particularly when they presented the evidence to the police and the police refused to investigate it, thus ensuring Nick Griffin got away with it. But I was called to a meeting on the 16th of October 2003, as you can see in that previous clip there, with the editor of the Daily Star. He later became the editor of the Daily Express just a few weeks later. And I obviously met with the political editor, John Chapman, as well as the Daily Express. And there was another guy there, I can't remember his name in actual fact. And it was actually brokered by John Lockett at the Daily Star, who I'd been in contact with, over an article he wrote called Nouveau Nazis. And this was a very interesting development, because I had a 45-minute meeting with them, and they asked me to outline exactly what I believed Griffin was up to in the British National Party. So at the time, whilst it didn't seem like it, in retrospect, I actually believed it was just a fact-finding meeting, quite frankly. And they paid me 500 quid for it, and plus £50 expenses to cover travel costs. And that was just for a consultation fee. And I actually gave them chapter and verse on the financial misconduct allegations against Griffin from within the BNP, which had been going on for quite some time, even in 2003. Absolutely, yes. And I'd experienced it myself, which was the reason why I quit, because I was being used pro bono to edit the party's newspaper, whilst Griffin was paying his cronies, particularly his chum down in the southeast. No other branch organisers were being paid a full-time wage, but his chum down in the southeast was. Well, yes, absolutely. That should surprise no one, because Griffin was paying all of his cronies. And they're all getting a nice fat cut out of the BNP. But the real activists, people like me, who the centre-right call their top-ranking BNP member. Well, I was the editor of the party newspapers. That was the last position I ever held in the BNP, so call it whatever you will. It doesn't really bother me in the slightest. I'm not interested, and I'm not in the least bit ashamed of it. If that's what they think, absolutely not. I'm proud of everything that I've done. And I'm actually proud of this as well. Because at that meeting, Peter Hill said, is the BNP still committed to a path of violence? And I said, ostensibly, no, absolutely not. But the thing is, they're still very closely connected to neo-Nazi groups like Blood and Honour, for example, because of the proceeds from the music industry. See, Blood and Honour, quite frankly, was long after Ian had died. I think it was, that was just over 10 years after Ian was killed. It had just become a money-making machine. And no one in it just seemed to be interested in anything other than raking it in, which is what they were doing. And of course, Griffin had previously helped to organise screwdriver festivals, a fact which he denied, because Griffin lies about everything. And he'll even lie about this video as well. He'll tell his chums, oh no, this never happened, he never went anywhere near any meeting. Well, of course, no, absolutely. And in the world of Nick Griffin, nothing ever happens if it's critical of Nick Griffin, is it? And so I told them about this, and I said, so there are some elements still committed to that path, but Griffin himself is not committed to that path. But ultimately, the goal is to destabilise the country to the extent that the people will embrace the British National Party as, I guess you could say, Deus Ex Machina. And oh no, they couldn't believe it. I just can't believe Nick Griffin is connected to neo-Nazis, said John Chapman. And Peter Hill agreed with him. And I thought, you've called me here, for a consultation. Apparently I'm an expert on the British National Party, but they knew more about it than what I did. That's very intriguing. And so when I went into chapter and verse on his financial dealings and all the allegations against him, they basically tried to trash that as well. And I thought to myself, I'm totally up against it here with a group of people who aren't interested in publishing anything about Nick Griffin, are they? Certainly nothing that remotely resembles the truth. And so I actually said to them, well, if you're not interested in any of this material that you've actually called me here to talk about, then what are you interested in? Peter Hill said, well, we'd like to do a series of 6 articles on the British National Party, but we're not touching any of this stuff. You're not going to touch any of the stuff about Griffin being connected to Blood and Honour and the British movement, and also Combat 18 and taking money from Blood and Honour. But you want to do 6 articles about the British National Party, leaving out all the best bits, and you don't want to touch any of the financial irregularities evidence either. So what exactly did they want to write about? Well, they just wanted to go into a shit piece session on the BNP, accusing it of being racist, et al., same old routine. And they wanted me to back it up, and I refused to do it because they weren't interested in anything remotely resembling substance. They just wanted some ideological drivel. And they also explained that, they were working with Hope Not Hate. And I said, well, in the context of Hope Not Hate, if you think this financial material has no substance to it, then go and contact them, and I'm sure they'll confirm it. And you can also contact them about Nick Griffin's long-standing collusion with neo-Nazis. That White Power t-shirt produced by the neo-Nazi British movement was a dead giveaway, wasn't it? Evidently not for them, but yes, they, I got nowhere, and they refused to do that as well. And I actually got the impression that Chapman in particular, who was very hostile, and because I wasn't a liberal, he said, so you're not a liberal, are you? And I said, no, I'm not a liberal, I will never become a liberal. No, absolutely not. And he became very ice cold, sat there very defensive with his arms folded. who sat directly opposite me at the conference table, and Peter Hill was sat directly on my right hand side, and his little scribbler, the chubby bloke, the blonde hair, I can't remember his name, was sat to my left. And whilst they were, whilst Peter Hill was amenable and friendly, and his scribbler was, or John Chapman was very hostile. And he said, "But how did you get involved in the far right?" He said, "You don't strike me as being the type of person who would ever be involved in the far right." Well, loads of people have said this to me. And the reason why is because they feed off stereotypes, which they create. They create these stereotypes, and then when they meet someone who doesn't actually conform to the stereotypical image of the far right, it's like, how could you ever be involved with the far right? Well, I wasn't I? Hence the reason I was at that meeting for a start. Although I've never regarded myself as being far right, I only ever call myself a nationalist because I don't play their game, quite frankly. And so, yeah, absolutely. And he said, "Surely your parents must have pushed you into this. You must have been encouraged into it, with lack of parental guidance." You see, another stereotypical piece of nonsense, sociological drivel. And I was, very happy to tell him that, my mother, in essence, as far as I was concerned, was a Christian liberal. And whilst she's not a practicing Christian, I think she's still a liberal. Nearly everyone in my family is a lefty. And my father was a member of the Communist Party, a lifelong member of the Labour Party, former NUM liaison officer. For those who don't know, NUM means National Union of Mine Workers, and a firebrand socialist stroke communist, quite frankly, in my opinion. I never stopped ranting about communism the whole of my childhood. So in actual fact, it had the opposite effect, didn't it? It's totally and utterly failed to brainwash me with his far left ideology. And so no, my parents didn't push me into nationalism in any way, shape or form. In fact, they were horrified. My father actually told people that he disowned me. Good, I couldn't care less. I didn't care then, I still don't care now, quite frankly. I followed my own path in life, a fact which I told him shortly before he died. And I think he finally understood that, as some of his own views had changed by that time, but obviously not the core essence of his rabid socialism, in truth, and that's my experience of it. But no, I certainly was not pushed into nationalism by my parents. In fact, they did everything they possibly could to try and get me out of the British National Party, unsuccessfully. And so no, they had nothing to do with it, so that stereotype fell down. The other stereotype fell down, and the whole sociological drama that these people create collapsed completely, didn't it? And so the truth of the matter is, they had no interest whatsoever in anything of any substance about Nick Griffin. And I took the view later that night when I was at home that, there's a whole range of people who claim to want to know the truth about Nick Griffin, but won't publish it. And I was, starting to think that maybe he's being protected, because what other reason is there for it? In fact, when I worked with the Sunday Times, people misunderstand the Sunday Times article because the vast majority of what I told them, they didn't actually publish at all. They invented a lot of stuff which I had struck out of the affidavit at the very last minute, and then I signed the final affidavit because I was content with it. But the Monsoon Mod Harrison, invented by Adin Hamzik, was just laughable. I had that struck out completely. And I wasn't prepared to go along with things of that nature. And that obviously referred to Calvin Richards's friend at the time, a Mr. Harrison, who came along from Long Eaton in Derbyshire, that place. They always seem to be from Long Eaton in Derbyshire, don't they? And, well, certainly have with the conflict I've had there in the past. And yes, he was ostensibly the manager of a successful business in Long Eaton, had his own house, invited everyone around to his garden parties, everyone in the BNP apart from me, that is. I was never once invited to any of his garden parties, not once. And the reason why? Well, because I could see straight through him, and I told Calvin at the time that I believed he was an infiltrator, and he wouldn't accept it. And then later, shortly before I had no contact with Calvin again of a friendly nature, he admitted to me that Harrison had bought a P Company certificate in Derby from a well-known forger, and his last contact with him was in the back of a Derbyshire police car, where he'd been allowed to phone them from his own phone, mobile phone, and ask them to come and rescue him while sat in the back of a Derbyshire police car. Very clear entrapment. I mean, the moment you're arrested, your phone is taken off you. You're not allowed to sit there in the back of the police car making phone calls. But yes, I mean, a dire warning I made to them fell on deaf ears, and I did this many times over the years in the British National Party. I was quite convinced that most of these people were deaf, daft and dumb. It was one of the reasons why I left. But yes, in the context of was Nick Griffin protected, I don't think there is absolutely any doubt whatsoever, based on my own experiences and the vast number of experiences people have shared with me from their dealings with Nick Griffin, that he was definitely connected and protected by the secret state. And I have absolutely no doubt about that. And the meeting with Peter Hill and John Chapman, they buried that material completely. And it concluded a couple of days later when I was told that they had killed the idea completely of writing anything about the British National Party, and they were going to hold off on the 6-article series about it. And that's, I think, really is because all I wanted to do was expose the truth. And the objective was to unseat Griffin. And they weren't interested in doing that. They were quite happy and content for Griffin to stay in situ, and I wasn't. And so that was the end of that one. And I don't regret it in any way, shape or form. But yeah, Express newspapers, well, what more can I say? Now, Griffin will always try and portray himself as being hard done by the mainstream media, and that's all contrivance as far as I'm concerned. And I've seen many examples of dealing with journalists, with the exception of the Sunday Mercury, who just like exaggerating everything out of all proportion, quite frankly, and that was the problem with them. Just no preparedness whatsoever, no willingness to actually publish the truth. And as I said, the material that actually went into the Sunday Times was only a third of what I'd given them, and they actually had planned a 2-page spread in actual fact, and that got killed on the final day before publication. It got slimmed right down. And so really that would have been a devastating blow for Griffin at that time. And if they had any intention of stopping him in a conspiracy, because Griffin always ranted about MI5, but not when he was looking at Simon Darby, oddly enough. And in fact, Kev Bryan said he was absolutely convinced Simon Darby was MI5. Well, Simon Darby was absolutely obsessed with accusing everyone who disagreed with him of being an MI5 agent. Griffin was the same in actual fact. In fact, I was quite convinced at one time that Griffin believed his own shadow was an MI5 agent stalking him everywhere. Now, you must remember that at the time of this meeting in October 2003, when I was telling them the stuff, I also told them about the stalking, that I was being stalked on the Nottinghamshire-Derbyshire border by Griffin's boot boys, and who were also Blood and Honour, British Movement and the BNP, that triumvirate of hate, quite frankly. And they certainly hated me with a passion, and because they were all hooked up in the Griffin crime machine, for want of a better description. It's just one giant scam what Griffin and Dowson did inside the British National Party, and Simon Darby was part and parcel of it the whole way. And so, yes, in truth, they got away very lightly, in my experience, because the media could have done so much more. And in fact, in April 2002, the Sunday Times could have published the entire story and knocked Griffin off his perch at that moment in time. They didn't. They published a few tidbits and let him remain in situ. And I've always taken the view over the years, I mean, not everything is always manifest, apparent at any one given moment in time. But when you review the situation over a number of years, it actually becomes quite clear when you put all the jigsaw pieces together that the puzzle revealed a man who was connected and protected. And so therefore, when all of these people contact me and say, you know, I'm sure Griffin was this and I'm sure Griffin was that, well, I can't confirm or deny any of what you say. It's not my job to do that. But I can speak of my own experience, and I'll say that Nick Griffin, yes, most definitely was connected and protected, and the press buried a whole range of stories about him, particularly the alleged hot tub incident between Griffin, Jackie and Mark Collett. I mean, nobody would touch that, even though people in the BNP were fully prepared to go on record and talk about it. But I mean, I wasn't privy to it, so I can't confirm or deny whether it happened or not. It's simply an allegation. But this is an example of what I'm talking about. The vast majority of the material that people actually took to the press about Nick Griffin never got published. And ultimately, you have to ask yourself, why is that?